After 40 years of marriage, my husband, Brad, suddenly told me he wanted to get a marriage license with his first love. "Jennifer, I know this is hard for you to accept," he said, "but Angelina has terminal stomach cancer. She doesn't have much time left. Her biggest regret in life is that we never got married. Can't you find it in your heart to be understanding just this once?" I agreed. 6 months later, when Brad came looking for me to remarry, I was at the community center, my hand resting on the shoulder of a handsome silver fox named George as we danced the salsa. "Marry you? I mean, I could," I said without missing a beat. "But why the hell would I tie the knot with a 3-time-wed-old geezer?" It all started after Brad went back to his hometown for his high school reunion. When he came back, he was a completely different person. He stopped going to the Sunday farmers market with me. Instead, he dusted off his vintage acoustic guitar and old sketch pads that he hadn't touched in 20 years, locking himself in his study all day to play and paint. Whenever I called him down for dinner, he would frantically hide his canvases, refusing to let anyone see them. I chuckled and said to our son, Leo, "Who would have thought? Your dad is pushing 70 and suddenly he's got secrets." Leo rolled his eyes. "Mom, stop projecting your own petty drama onto Dad. He's been a stand-up guy his whole life. His record is spotless. You really think he's gonna start acting up in his twilight years? If you ask me, you just have too much time on your hands." With that, Leo tossed his dirty laundry at me, expecting me to hand wash his expensive sweaters. I stood there, clutching Leo's dirty clothes in one hand and Brad's empty dinner plate in the other. My shoulders slumped as I walked into the kitchen. "Yeah, I'm just overthinking it," I told myself. Brad had been a straight-laced, quiet man his entire life. What could possibly happen? Still, even though I accepted this sudden artistic renaissance of his, I couldn't help but worry. Brad had type 2 diabetes and osteoporosis. His doctor specifically told him to get outside, take walks, and get some vitamin D. Staying cooped up in that stuffy room all day was bound to wreck his health. I planned to sit him down and talk about it, at least get him to walk the neighborhood for an hour a day. But before I ever got the chance, an uninvited guest showed up at our door. That morning, I had gone down to the local butcher to buy some high-quality beef bones. I wanted to make a rich bone broth to help with Brad's joints. The pavement outside the market was slick with rain, and I took a hard spill on the concrete. I walked through our front door covered in mud, aching, and smelling faintly of raw meat. When I looked up, there was a woman in her 60s standing in my living room. She was wearing an elegant cashmere cardigan, her hair styled in a flawless French twist. And she was holding Brad's hand. When she saw me, she gently let go of his hand and offered a polite, refined smile. "You must be Brad's wife." It was a perfectly normal greeting, but to my surprise, Brad completely stiffened up. He practically shoved me back out into the hallway. Only when the living room door was pulled shut did he lower his voice to a frantic whisper. "Jennifer, that's my old high school classmate, Angelina. We haven't seen each other in decades. We only reconnected at the reunion a few weeks ago." I stared at him blankly. My mind suddenly flashed back to the stories from his youth. What was the name of that high school sweetheart he used to obsess over? Brad shifted uncomfortably. "She has stage 4 stomach cancer. She came up to Boston to get treatment at Mass General. She's going to stay with us for a while. I need you to go clear out the study so she can sleep in there." "The study? The room I was practically forbidden from entering for the last 40 years? Angelina shows up, and she gets to move right in?" When I didn't say anything, Brad assumed I was fine with it. He muttered a few more instructions and reached for the doorknob to go back inside. I grabbed him by the sleeve. "Brad, she's not family. We don't owe her anything. Why is she moving into our house?" Brad paused, his tone turning sharp. "I just told you, didn't I? She has cancer. The hospitals here are the best. She can get treated without living here. You're just an old classmate, not her husband." Brad's face darkened with anger. Just then, our son Leo walked out into the hall. "Mom, Aunt Angelina is just staying temporarily. It's not permanent. Why are you being so narrow-minded?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Temporary. Sounds great. But as what exactly is she staying in our home? And once she's settled in, who's cooking for her? Who's doing her laundry? Who's driving her to her chemo appointments? Am I supposed to wait on her hand and foot after I'm done serving you and your father?" Brad glared at me, his voice suddenly rising to a rough shout. "I'll do it. I'll take care of it, okay? You don't have to lift a finger for her. As long as Angelina is under this roof, she is my responsibility." With that, he yanked his arm free, slammed the door open, and stormed back inside. Leo looked at me with deep annoyance. "Mom, what is your problem?" he sighed. "She's just an old friend of Dad's who needs medical help. Why can't you just let her stay? Do you seriously not trust Dad?" My hands trembled as I picked up the bags of groceries and beef bones I'd dropped on the floor. Suddenly, they felt unbearably heavy. I shoved the bags into Leo's chest. "You and your father can figure out lunch. I'm not feeling well. I'm going to urgent care." I really wasn't feeling well. When you get to my age, a hard fall is no joke. My whole body throbbed. Thankfully, the x-rays at the clinic showed no broken bones, just a severely pulled ligament in my back. I came home smelling of icy hot patches and clutching a bag of painkillers. As I walked through the front door, I heard music drifting from the study. I pushed the door open. Brad was sitting on a stool, strumming his vintage acoustic guitar, looking at Angelina with absolute adoration in his eyes while she sang an old Fleetwood Mac song. Standing right next to them was my own flesh and blood, Leo, filming them on his phone. When I walked in holding my pharmacy bag, none of them bothered to ask how I was doing. Leo actually clicked his tongue in annoyance. "Mom, we were filming a TikTok. Why did you have to just barge in? Now I have to do the whole takeover." Angelina offered a gracious, sickeningly sweet smile. "It's okay, Leo. Jennifer hasn't heard this song before. It's completely natural that she'd be curious and want to peek in. Her voice was gentle, but the underlying tone reeked of absolute superiority. Brad just gave me a look of sheer impatience and turned his back to me. Standing there, it hit me, that look of impatience was the exact same look he gave me the very first day we met. Back then, he was a struggling indie musician, broke, nowhere to live, desperately needing a stable union job just to survive. The only things he had to his name were a handsome face and a head full of poetry. The first time we met, I pointed at the worn paperback in his hands and innocently asked, "What ya reading?" He looked down at me, clearly wanting to snatch the book away, but forced himself to tolerate my presence and showed me the cover. I knew he looked down on me. He was the tortured intellectual, and I was just a girl working the assembly line at the Ford plant. But because my dad was a union rep who could get him a secure job at the factory, he eventually swallowed his pride and married me. Yet, from the day we said I do, his guitars, his poetry books, his canvases, they all vanished from my sight. If I ever went into his study just to dust the shelves, he would glare at me, snatching the feather duster from my hand. His study was his castle, the sanctuary for his genius and his dreams. Outside that door was me, the mundane world of bills, groceries, and compromises he was forced to endure. For 40 years, I ran this house alone. I raised our son. I took care of his paralyzed mother until my own spinal discs ruptured, getting up the next morning slapped in lidocaine patches just to make them oatmeal. My relatives always told me, Brad might just be a factory worker, but he's a loyal, decent man. That's enough. I used to comfort myself with those exact words. But now, even that illusion of decency was gone. For 3 days straight, Brad took Angelina to Mass General. When he came home at night, his face was always dark and heavy. The only time he ever smiled was when he was looking directly at her. After wrestling with my own pride, I finally walked over to him one evening. "Brad, I know you're stressed about Angelina's treatments, but you have to watch your own health. You haven't taken your metformin in days." He looked irritated and swatted my hand away, sending the white pills scattering across the hardwood floor. "Mind your own business." He stood up and walked away. I stood there, clenching my jaw, before getting on my hands and knees to pick up the pills one by one. Because Angelina couldn't stomach my cooking, she suddenly announced she wanted to make lunch. After clattering around in my kitchen for an hour, she brought out a massive, piping hot bowl of southern peach cobbler loaded with brown sugar. "Brad, you used to love eating this back in college," she said, her voice taking on the soft, coquettish lilt of a 20-year-old girl. "Tell me if it tastes just like it used to." Brad reached for the bowl eagerly. Instinctively, I intervened. "You shouldn't eat that, Brad. You have diabetes. That's pure sugar." Angelina's face instantly fell into a mask of pure heartbreak. Brad shot me a murderous glare, snatched the bowl, and practically inhaled half of it in one breath. Incredible. It tastes exactly like the old days." Just to validate her, he ate 3 whole servings. Angelina beamed. "If you like it so much, I'll make it for you every day." I stared at the sticky syrup pooling at the bottom of the empty dish and kept my mouth shut. Leo walked into the kitchen and rolled his eyes at me. "Mom, seriously? Aunt Angelina was just doing something nice. Why did you have to try and ruin it? Don't tell me you're actually getting jealous over a dessert." I wasn't jealous. I was terrified for his health. A few years ago, his blood sugar had spiked so high it nearly blinded him. I was the one who dragged him to the specialists, managed his medications, and policed his diet for years just to get his numbers down to a safe range. I wasn't going to let his health be destroyed just because Angelina wanted to play playing house. That night after doing the dishes, I practically had to beg Brad to use his blood sugar monitor. Sure enough, the numbers were through the roof. I took a deep breath. "Brad, pure sugar and carbs spike your levels instantly. You cannot eat stuff like that anymore." Brad slammed his hand on the table and stood up. "You just can't stand the fact that I ate Angelina's cooking, can you? It's just a little cobbler. God, you are so suffocating." With that, he stormed into the study. A minute later, the soft strumming of the guitar started up again. I sat alone on the living room sofa, staring at the flashing red numbers on the glucose monitor for a long time. After that day, Brad and Angelina stopped eating at home altogether. They would leave first thing in the morning and wouldn't return until 8 or 9 at night. I had no idea where they went when they weren't at the hospital. Because of the chemo, Angelina's complexion was terrible, but every morning she would layer on expensive foundation and swipe on a bold red lipstick. She dressed impeccably, chic silk scarves, tailored trench coats. Standing next to a tall, broad-shouldered man like Brad, they looked like the perfect autumnal romance. It didn't take long for the neighborhood gossips at the supermarket to start asking questions. "Jennifer, I saw Brad walking with that old classmate of his. They look awfully cozy." I avoided their prying eyes, nervously twisting the handles of my reusable grocery bag. "She's just in town for cancer treatments. Brad's just showing her around. She'll be going home soon." "Right," they replied, their tone dripping with skepticism. I gripped my bags tighter and kept walking. It felt like if I just played deaf and blind, I could stop the world from peering into the cracks of my failing marriage. But what was coming, came anyway. One afternoon, Brad texted me saying he was coming home for dinner. Just him. I was actually thrilled. I spent hours cooking a massive spread of his favorite foods, waiting for him at the table. A part of me thought, if he just talks to me nicely, I'll let all this nonsense with Angelina go. Brad walked through the door alone. I fussed over him, putting food on his plate, but he looked completely zoned out. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down. "Jennifer, I need to talk to you." He spoke slowly, his voice heavy. His fingers trembled slightly against the tabletop, like he was suppressing a massive weight. "Angelina's cancer is in the final stages. She doesn't have much time left. Her absolute last wish in this world is to get a marriage license with me. I was in the middle of handing him a dinner roll. My hands froze in midair. What does that mean? He looked down at his lap. I want us to get a divorce. A deathly silence fell over the dining room. After a painfully long pause, Leo let out an awkward, forced chuckle. Come on, it's just a piece of paper, right? When Aunt Angelina passes away, Dad will just marry you again, Mom. Isn't that right, Dad? Brad kept his head bowed, the thinning silver hair on his crown shifting slightly. It was a silent confirmation. My shock finally wore off, replaced by a cold, piercing clarity. My voice cut through the room like a knife. Divorce? Over my dead body. Brad seemed genuinely shocked by my reaction. Jennifer, I know this is hard for you to accept, but Angelina is out of time. Her absolute biggest regret in life is that we never got married. Can't you just find an ounce of empathy for a dying woman? Leo chimed in, looking at me with pure judgment. Yeah, Mom. You've always been a decent person. Why are you being so cruel to Aunt Angelina? Just because she was Dad's first love? They're practically in their 70s, for God's sake. What do you think is going to happen? My right hand was shaking so hard I could barely point my finger at Brad. They leave together every morning, they come back late, and when they are here, they lock themselves in that study for hours. You call that nothing happening? Brad, look me in the eye and tell me the truth. Do you just want to be with her and throw me away? Brad's lips twitched. He bit down on his bottom lip, trying to look like the patient, long-suffering husband. What are you even talking about? I'm helping Angelina because she is an old friend. Jennifer, I always knew you were a bit shallow. But if you can't even find it in your heart to grant a dying woman her final wish, then I am profoundly disappointed in you. He turned on his heel, marched out the front door, and slammed it behind him. I stumbled over to the living room window and looked down at the street. Angelina was standing on the sidewalk, wrapped in an elegant cashmere coat. Brad emerged from the building. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but within seconds, they were wrapped in a tight embrace. They rested their foreheads together for a long time, then linked hands and walked away. I slid down the wall until I hit the floor, sitting next to the table full of the home-cooked meal I'd spent hours preparing. Tears spilled over my cheeks, weaving a silent, sticky web across my face. Brad didn't come home for 3 days. I didn't leave the house for 3 days. I couldn't wrap my head around why he absolutely insisted on getting a legal divorce. But on the third day, I finally understood. I picked up the phone. Brad, come home tomorrow. Bring your ID. We're going to the courthouse to file the papers. He was cold at the start of the call, but his voice instantly spiked with pleasant surprise. You're agreeing to it? I nodded weakly, even though he couldn't see me. But you and Angelina can't live here anymore. It's inappropriate, and I won't be the neighborhood laughingstock. Brad had a massive ego and cared deeply about appearances. He immediately replied, fine, we'll move out. Leo's new condo is sitting empty anyway. Good. I keep this house, and you can take Leo's condo. If you don't like those terms, we don't sign the papers. That completely choked off whatever argument he was about to make. He was quiet for a long moment before finally sighing. Fine, whatever you say. But Jennifer, don't be bitter about this. Angelina's cancer really is incurable. I'm just going to keep her company for this final stretch. Once she's gone, I'll come back to you. It was the softest his voice had been in weeks. I didn't even have the energy to humor him. Sign the papers tomorrow, then come get your stuff. I've already ordered the U-Haul boxes. Brad didn't call back after that. He was probably off popping champagne with Angelina. The only call I got was from Leo, who immediately started complaining. He was pissed that I'd kicked his dad out and forced them to occupy his pristine, newly bought bachelor pad. I just threw his own words right back at him. Leo, you've always been a decent person. Why are you being so cruel? Your dad and Aunt Angelina just want to stay at your place for a while. Why are you being so narrow-minded? Leo was speechless. I hung up, and in the quiet of the empty house, I started packing up Brad's life. Packing someone away isn't easy, especially when you've shared a life for 40 years. Boxing up his belongings felt like scraping meat right off my own bones. His vintage guitars, his tweed jackets, his poetry books, filled with decades of margin notes. Finally, I started packing up his sketch pads. As I placed them into the box, one fell open. I stared at the charcoal drawing on the page for a long time. It was only after Brad walked out 3 days ago that I took a real look around his study. I realized that over the years, he had drawn hundreds of portraits of Angelina. Young Angelina, mature Angelina, Angelina smiling, Angelina looking pensive. His little sanctuary was absolutely completely covered in traces of her. For 40 years, while I was scrubbing floors and balancing checkbooks, Brad had filled every hidden corner of his mind with her, seeing that broke the last lingering chain tying me to this marriage. In Brad's heart, his only true wife was Angelina. My 40 years with him were just a mundane compromise so he could have a roof over his head and hot meals on the table. The divorce went through without a hitch. Seeing me limping slightly from my bad back, the courthouse clerk kindly helped me to the door. I gave her an embarrassed smile. Must be funny, seeing a woman my age in here getting a divorce. Funny? Honey, it's a trend, she beamed. You're just keeping up with the times. Dropping dead weight and stepping into a new life, it's never too late for that, right? I looked at her bright, encouraging smile, and my eyes welled up. You're right. As soon as the ink was dry, Brad couldn't wait to run back to Angelina. I knew they'd probably march right back in and get their own marriage license before the day was out. But none of that was my business anymore. I went home alone, called a moving company, and had them haul all of Brad's boxes over to Leo's condo. Not long after, an infuriated Brad called me. Jennifer, what is your problem? Did you seriously have to dump all this stuff here today? Are you just doing this to be vindictive? I answered at my own sluggish pace. If your stuff stays at my house, I'm charging you storage fees. Brad paused, then hissed viciously, fine. Just don't come crying to me when you regret this. I hung up. Even though my chest ached, a massive, unexpected wave of relief washed over me. Regret what? We were finally walking our separate paths. Brad didn't reach out again. Instead, I saw them constantly on Leo's Instagram stories. Today it was Brad and Angelina at the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Tomorrow it was an exclusive gallery in the seaport. The next day, a 5-star seafood buffet. They were living the absolute high life. Angelina always wore her elegant scarves, her face powdered so brightly you couldn't even see the sickness. Brad looked sharp in his tailored suits. Honestly, they looked like a magazine spread. Leo's posts were flooded with comments from his friends saying how they were couple goals and the epitome of aesthetic senior romance. But as I zoomed in on the photos, staring at Brad's increasingly sallow, grayish complexion, all I could think about was his health. Brad had an awful constitution. For years, the only thing keeping him out of the hospital was my relentless nagging and strict control over his diet. Living this recklessly, indulging in buffets and late nights, wasn't it going to destroy him? But again, Brad's health wasn't my problem anymore. After they moved out, Leo rarely visited. The house, once loud and full of endless chores, was completely silent. It was just me. Suddenly, I had all this free time, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I started skipping meals. One afternoon, my blood sugar plummeted so low that I actually passed out right on the sidewalk outside the pharmacy. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Neither Leo nor Brad was there. Instead, it was two ladies from my condo's homeowners association hovering over me. They sighed in relief when I opened my eyes. Jennifer, honey, you gave us a scare. We really don't feel right sending you back to an empty house. Do you want us to call your son to come get you? I hesitated, but eventually nodded. One of the women stepped into the hall to make the call. She came back shaking her head, looking disgusted. Jennifer, your son says he's too busy at work to come down. Maybe you should stay here a couple more days until you get your strength back. I shook my head slowly. Can you help me hire a home health aide? I don't want to be a bother. The ladies exchanged a look of deep sympathy. Before leaving, one of them squeezed my hand. Jennifer, being divorced isn't the end of the world. If you need anything, groceries, a ride, anything at all, you call us. We're right down the hall. I looked at their warm, concerned eyes, and a lump formed in my throat. Isn't it ironic? When push comes to shove, the son I raised for 30 years is nowhere to be found, but total strangers are willing to step up. The home health aide, Sarah, was wonderful. Once I was discharged, I brought her home with me. For decades, I had put Brad and Leo's health above everything else, completely ignoring my own aches and pains. But now, it was just me. I couldn't afford to neglect myself anymore. I started going to doctor's appointments regularly. I focused on eating right and rebuilding my strength. Thankfully, I was tough in my youth, and my doctor said with the right care, my body could bounce back, as long as I didn't overwork myself. One day, Sarah took me to an acupuncture and holistic wellness clinic for my back pain. Right in the lobby, I ran straight into Angelina and Brad. Brad had lost a shocking amount of weight. He was holding Angelina up with one arm, while his other hand clutched several massive bags of herbal remedies. Angelina looked exhausted. Even the thick layers of expensive foundation couldn't hide the hollow, gray look of death creeping onto her face. When they saw me, both of them jumped. I just gave a curt nod, didn't say a word, and walked past them into the treatment room, leaning on Sarah's arm. To my surprise, when I came out an hour later, Brad was waiting in the hallway. He stared at me for a long time before shuffling over. Jennifer, what are you doing at a clinic? I messed up a ligament in my back. It aches when it rains, so I'm getting physical therapy. Since when do you have back problems? He asked, genuinely confused. I gave him a side eye. I've always had it. You just never noticed, and I was too busy taking care of your house to ever get it checked out. Brad looked deeply embarrassed. After an awkward silence, he tried to force a conversation. I brought Angelina here for holistic therapy. We heard the doctors here have some experimental treatments for stage 4 cancer. I furrowed my brow. Why are you telling me this? Brad opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a nurse called out for Angelina's family. At the same time, Sarah came back with my prescriptions. I stood up and walked away. As I left, I could feel Brad's eyes boring into my back, staring at me like a lost puppy. I didn't care about Brad and Angelina's life. But somehow, updates always found their way to my ears. Mostly through frantic phone calls from Leo. Mom, when are you going to let Dad move back in? I have a girlfriend now, and having them live in my condo is a total nightmare. I was volunteering at the community center when he called. Leo, did you bump your head? Your father and I are legally divorced. Leo's voice grew agitated. Come on, it was a fake divorce to make Aunt Angelina happy. You were with him for 40 years, you can't actually live without him. Just let them move back in. Dad promises he won't be affectionate with her in front of you, okay? You have no idea what I'm dealing with. Aunt Angelina is boiling these gross herbal medicines all day, the whole place smells like a swamp. The other day I came home and she'd been incontinent, completely ruined my mattress. Mom, this is my new condo. What if it permanently smells like a nursing home? Leo clearly had no one else to vent to, so he just word vomited everything to me. Angelina's savings had run dry, so Brad was paying for all her out-of-pocket treatments. Angelina absolutely refused to cook or clean, so the condo was a literal pigsty. And Brad was still blowing his 401k on ridiculous, useless romantic gifts for her, antique French vases, limited edition tea sets. I couldn't help but laugh. Leo, Aunt Angelina is terminally ill, and you're complaining about a mattress? Why are you being so cruel and narrow-minded? Listen to me. Your dad married her. She is officially your stepmother. You need to treat your new stepmom with some respect. Understood? With that, I hung up. It was hilarious. When they were forcing me to accept the divorce, I was the shallow, unfeeling one. Now he wanted to pawn them back off onto me? If he was so compassionate, he could deal with it himself. After that, I stopped answering Leo's calls entirely. My hospital stint had opened my eyes. The son I raised was just as selfish as the father. I couldn't rely on either of them. If I wanted a good retirement, I needed to protect my assets. I started looking into premium assisted living communities and reverse mortgage options. I didn't see either of them for a long time. Leo was busy with his own mess, and eventually stopped calling. Brad, however, started lurking. I'd occasionally see him sitting on a bench outside my condo building. When he saw me, he'd stare with big, pitiful eyes. But he never approached me. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was waiting for me to go to him. He'd been the king of his castle for 40 years. He genuinely believed I was still pining for him. But I had finally put him down. I spent a lifetime hitting a brick wall trying to get that man to love me. At my age, I was done hoping. A few months went by. One afternoon, I ran into one of the neighborhood gossips in the lobby. She told me Angelina had died. Hey, Jennifer, did you hear? Brad's old high school flame passed. It was a mess, honestly. Bedridden for half a month, total incontinence. When the doctors said there was nothing left to do, Brad pulled the plug and took her home to pass. I heard she had terrible bed sores by the end. You know how useless men are at caretaking. But hey, she was single her whole life. Having a man hold her hand at the end was probably a blessing. The woman gave me a pointed look. Well, now that she's dead, Brad can finally come back home. I was on my way to the community center for a dance class. I barely broke stride. He's not my Brad anymore. He has his own home. He doesn't need to come to mine. Oh, come on, Jennifer. You two were married for 40 years. He only left to play nurse for an old friend. Now that she's gone, it's only natural he comes back. Plus, she was sick the whole time. It's not like they were actually doing anything physical. Are you really still holding a grudge? I just chuckled. I haven't held a grudge in months. Anyway, gotta run. My salsa class starts in 10. I walked into the community center. My new dance friends were already waiting. Honestly, I wasn't uncultured. When I was young, I was the star of the factory's dance troupe. When it came to ballroom and Latin dancing, nobody could touch me. But after I married Brad, he told me dancing was vulgar and promiscuous, so I hung up my shoes. Now, my back was healed, I was a free woman, and I was taking my passions back. In fact, the center was picking a pair to compete in the regional senior ballroom championship, and I needed a partner. Dancing is intoxicating. I completely forgot about Angelina's death the second I hit the floor with George. George was 5 years younger than me. He was in great shape, though a bit stiff and overly technical when he danced. I stopped the music and started adjusting his posture and footwork. He was a bit shy, but very eager to learn. I grabbed his hand and placed it firmly on my waist, ready to cue the music for another run-through. Suddenly, someone seized my wrist and violently yanked me backward. I spun around. Brad's face, red with absolute fury, was inches from mine. Jennifer, what the hell are you doing dancing with this guy? The music stopped. Everyone in the hall turned to stare. George was startled for a second, but recovered quickly and shoved Brad hard in the chest. Who the hell are you? What's it your business who Jennifer dances with? I'm her husband. Bullshit. George shot back. Everyone here knows Jennifer got divorced months ago. The two older men instantly lunged at each other. George was in much better shape, and within seconds, he had Brad pinned to the linoleum floor, throwing punches. If the rest of the seniors hadn't scrambled over to pull them apart, I honestly think Brad would have been sent to join Angelina right then and there. Well, practice was ruined. I dragged Brad over to a corner bench and grabbed the first aid kit, dabbing an ice pack on a nasty bruise forming on his forehead. I sighed, exhausted by him. Brad, what on earth was the point of that stunt? Brad slumped his shoulders, his face pulled into a miserable pout. Jennifer, can you please stop doing these stupid dances? Touching other men, grinding against them, have you no self-respect? I frowned and slowly pulled the ice pack away from his head. Why shouldn't I dance? And furthermore, Brad, who gave you the right to police me? We are divorced. Brad looked up at me, his eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Jennifer, I didn't tell you. Angelina is gone. And, so we can get remarried now. He stared at me, unblinking, as if he fully expected me to burst into tears of joy and throw my arms around his neck. I just looked at him, my brow furrowed in utter bewilderment. Why on earth would I remarry you? Marry you? I mean, I could, I scoffed. But why the hell would I tie the knot with a broke, 3-time-wet old geezer? Brad looked like I had slapped him across the face. He genuinely hadn't anticipated this reaction. But we agreed. It was just a trial separation, a fake divorce, you agreed to it. There is no such thing as a fake divorce, Brad. The papers we signed at the courthouse were very real. Besides, you spent the last 6 months playing house with Angelina. Did you really think that the second you snapped your fingers, I'd come running back like a loyal dog? Brad, you really think I'm that pathetic? It seemed that only at this exact moment did the reality finally crash down on him. I really, truly didn't want him anymore. He began to panic. I didn't mean it like that. She was sick, Jennifer. I just wanted to take care of her. And to take care of her, you threw me away. You threw our marriage in the trash. I gave a cold, dismissive smile. Brad, look me in the eye and tell me it was just about caretaking. Tell me you didn't love her more than me for 40 years. Brad fell dead silent. I stood up. We're too old to be acting like high schoolers. Stop embarrassing yourself. I was done, but Brad clearly wasn't. After that day, he tried to hunt me down constantly. Every time he opened his mouth, it was, "Jennifer, let's get remarried. Jennifer, come home." I got so annoyed I just blocked his number. The ballroom championship was coming up, and I wasn't about to let his drama ruin my focus. But when he couldn't reach me on the phone, he resorted to writing letters. I'd find them shoved in my mailbox, written in his perfect, pretentious calligraphy. Things like, "After weathering so many storms, I look back and realize you were the best thing that ever happened to me." Or, "Angelina was my past. With her death, that chapter is closed forever. I only want to spend the rest of my days with you." Or, "Looking back at the autumn leaves, who will walk with me into the winter? Only you, my Jennifer." I read these pages of cringy Hallmark poetry and suddenly remembered a time in my 20s when I would have killed for a love letter from him. Now, it just made my stomach turn. George came over to my place to practice, saw the letters on the counter, and gave me a warning look. "Jennifer, don't let him sweet talk you into falling for his traps." I burst out laughing. Sweet talk? Please. When Brad was with Angelina, he blew thousands on vintage jewelry and luxury dinners to prove his love. Writing some cheap poems on scrap paper? That wasn't a trap. That was just pathetic. I dumped the whole stack into the trash can. A few days later, my phone rang from an unknown number. It was Leo. "Mom, you have to come down to the ER. Dad's in the hospital." What kind of stunt is this now? I didn't really want to go, but morbid curiosity got the better of me. I drove down to Mass General. In the ER lobby, Leo was having a screaming match with Brad over a $3,000 hospital copay. "Dad, are you seriously telling me you don't have $3,000 in the bank?" Leo yelled. "You get a fat pension every month. Did you blow every last cent of your retirement on Aunt Angelina?" Brad, lying on a gurney with a plaster cast on his leg, looked deeply ashamed. "Your Aunt Angelina, her dying wish was to be buried in a premium plot overlooking the water. So you drained your entire life savings to buy a corpse a luxury condo?" Leo shrieked. "Dad, how are you going to pay for your own care? How are you going to survive? Did you even think about that?" Leo's voice was dripping with venom. Then he turned, saw me standing in the doorway, and let out a massive sigh of relief. "Thank God you're here, Mom." He practically shoved the billing invoice into my chest. "Can you go to the desk and pay this?" Dad's being completely ridiculous, he doesn't have a dime left. I didn't take the paper. I let it flutter to the floor. Why would I pay for him? Leo froze. "Mom, come on. He's my dad." "Right, your dad. Not my husband." I looked over at Brad, pathetic and broken on the gurney. "I just came to see what landed him in the hospital. Now that I know, I'm leaving." Leo panicked and blocked my path. "Wait, you can't just leave. Who's going to stay here and take care of him? I have to go to work tomorrow." "That sounds like a you problem, Leo. Not mine." Brad's hands gripped the hospital sheets so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Jennifer, are you really this heartless? I'm lying in a hospital bed, and you won't even stay with me." "Why should I?" I asked, looking down at him. "You threw me away to take care of your high school sweetheart until the day she died. I am certainly not going to play nurse to an ex-husband who means absolutely nothing to me. Being sick is your problem. Honestly, I'm thrilled. At least with a broken leg, you can't stalk me anymore." I looked at Brad's aged, despairing face, gave him a tight smile, and turned on my heel. "See ya." Brad's broken leg was honestly a blessing in disguise. Without him constantly harassing me, George and I breezed through the regionals and won first place in the senior ballroom championship. We didn't just become the pride of the community center, we even got a feature in the local Boston newspaper. George was ecstatic. He was constantly finding excuses to take me out to dinner or bring me coffee. I had zero intention of ever getting married again. But having a handsome, attentive companion to spend time with? That was perfectly fine by me. After an interview with the local paper, I walked back to my condo carrying my gold trophy. Sitting right outside my door, slumped against the wall like a stray dog, was Brad. When he saw me, his eyes welled up with tears. "Jennifer, please don't abandon me." I stood over him, looking down with cold detachment. "I spoke to the doctors when I was at the ER. You have stage 3 osteoporosis. A strong sneeze could break a rib. Your diabetes is completely out of control, causing diabetic retinopathy. You're going blind. And if you keep it up, they'll be amputating your toes next. You blew your entire life savings and took out $50,000 in loans just to buy Angelina a fancy grave. Brad, look at yourself and tell me, why on earth would I want you?" Brad's lips trembled, but no sound came out. After a long agonizing minute, he reached into his jacket with a shaking hand. Because we were married for 40 years. Jennifer, my heart, it always belonged to you." He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper and held it up. It was a charcoal portrait of me. "Look, Jennifer. After Angelina died, I started drawing you. See? You've always been in my heart." I let out a harsh laugh, snatched the drawing from his hand, and ripped it straight down the middle. "It's hideous. You ignored me for 40 years, and now that you're broken and broke, you try to pull this romantic stunt? Do you have any idea how pathetic you look? If you need someone to wipe your ass, go find that compassionate son of yours. If you come near my door again, I am calling the police." With that, I unlocked my door and slammed it in his face. I could hear Brad sobbing loudly in the hallway. I just walked over to my stereo, turned up the salsa music, and drowned him out. The very last time I saw Brad, he was in a wheelchair. George and I were walking through the Boston Public Garden on our way to a dance showcase. I spotted Brad sitting alone in a wheelchair near the duck pond, staring blankly ahead. When he saw me, he tried to lurch forward, clearly agitated, but his mouth just gaped open. He couldn't form words anymore. A severe stroke, most likely. George looked at him, then back at me, a little nervous. I didn't hit him that hard back at the community center, did I? I laughed out loud. Don't worry, George. He did this to himself. He had locked himself in the shadows of his own making. Let him stay there. I slipped my arm through George's, and we kept walking. Out into the brilliant, golden light of a perfect spring day. The end.